Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most transformative conflicts in all of human history, World War I. It was called the war to end all wars, but as we'll see, it really just set the stage for an even deadlier century.
So how does that even happen? How does one assassination in a city most people hadn't heard of lead to a global catastrophe with over 37 million casualties? That's what we're going to unpack. We'll trace how this one regional crisis just spiraled completely out of control, consuming empires and changing warfare forever.
All right, part one. So picture this. It's the summer of 1914, and Europe is basically a giant powder keg. It's just packed with simmering rivalries, a tangled web of alliances, and these massive, sprawling empires. All it really needed was one little spark to set the whole continent on fire.
And this is how tense things were. Europe was basically split into two big teams. You had the Triple Entente, that's France, Britain, and Russia, and they were all kind of united by a shared suspicion of Germany's growing power. And on the other side, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy. With this setup, this whole intricate web of promises, a single argument between two countries could drag everyone else into a massive war.
And what's just wild is how fast it all happened. It was like a line of dominoes. Look at this timeline. On June 28th, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is shot in Sarajevo. Austria-Hungary points the finger at Serbia and gives them this impossible ultimatum. Serbia, of course, says no. So Austria-Hungary declares war. Then Russia, who sees itself as Serbia's protector, starts mobilizing its massive army. Well, Germany, being allied with Austria-Hungary, turns around and declares war on Russia, and then on Russia's ally, France. It's insane. In just over a month, Europe goes from a really tense peace to an all-out war.
So Germany's big idea was something called the Schlieffen Plan. The goal was a lightning-fast knockout punch. Go through neutral Belgium, crush France before they knew what hit them, and then turn around and deal with the huge but slow Russian army. Well, it didn't work. The plan totally failed. The Belgians put up a surprisingly fierce fight, and then the Allies made this desperate stand at the Battle of the Marne that saved Paris. The result? Both sides dug in, creating this brutal 350-mile-long scar of trenches across Europe. The war of movement was over.
Okay, on to part two. So any of that early talk about a short, glorious war, be home by Christmas, that completely evaporated in the mud and barbed wire. What replaced it was this horrific new reality. It was industrial-scale slaughter, a kind of war that no one had ever seen before.
The whole strategy just shifted. It became a war of attrition. The goal wasn't to capture some key city or have a brilliant breakthrough anymore. Nope. The goal was much simpler and much more horrifying. Kill so many of the enemy's soldiers that their country would just break, that it would lose the will to even fight. One German general famously said the plan was to bleed them white.
And this number, 365,000, just perfectly illustrates that brutal strategy. That's the number of French casualties at just one battle, the Battle of Verdun. And Verdun wasn't about taking a city. It was designed from the start to be a human meat grinder. The entire purpose was to kill so many French soldiers that their army would literally cease to exist.
And it wasn't just the French. The British had their own catastrophe at the Somme. Look at this number, 77,000. That's how many casualties the British army took on the very first day of the battle. Waves and waves of men were just ordered out of their trenches straight into machine gun fire. It's still the single bloodiest day in the entire history of the British Army. This was the grim math of attrition.
So after years of this bloody stalemate, we get to 1917. And this was the year everything changed. We had two huge, monumental events on opposite sides of the world that would completely alter the course of the war and, really, seal the fate of the Central Powers. It was like a giant scale tipping. On one side, Russia, which had been crippled by massive casualties and chaos at home, just erupted into revolution. The new government wanted out of the war, immediately. That freed up about 500,000 German troops to go fight on the Western Front. But, on the other side of the scale, Germany made a desperate gamble. Their unrestricted U-boat warfare, plus this inflammatory Zimmerman telegram trying to get Mexico to attack the U.S., finally dragged the United States and all of its industrial power into the war. But America entering the war wasn't some instant fix. By 1917, the Allies were truly at the breaking point. The French army, just bled dry after years of useless attacks, was hit by widespread mutinies. Whole units were just refusing to fight.
And on the Italian front, a huge German and Austro-Hungarian attack just shattered the Italian lines, almost knocking them completely out of the war.
So here we are in part 4. Russia is out. The American army is still on its way over. The German High Command saw this as their last best chance. They gathered all those new divisions from the Eastern Front for one final all-or-nothing push to win the war in the spring of 1918.
And at first, Germany's huge spring offensive worked. It smashed through the British lines and they advanced for miles. But it wasn't the knockout blow they needed. The Allies bent, but they didn't break. And by summer, the German army was just exhausted. And that's when the tide turned for good. Bolstered by hundreds of thousands of fresh American troops, the Allies launched what's called the 100 Days Offensive. It was just this relentless, non-stop counterattack that finally broke the back of the German army.
By the fall of 1918, it was over for Germany. All of its allies, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, they were collapsing and signing their own peace deals. At home, the German people were starving, and revolution was in the air. The Kaiser fled, and the new German government had no choice but to sign an armistice. And so, at 11 a.m. on November 11th, the fighting finally stopped.
So the guns fell silent, but the war's consequences, they were just getting started. The peace that came next would redraw the map of the world, for sure, but it would end up creating just as many problems as it solved.
I mean, the sheer scale of the devastation it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. The war left nearly 10 million soldiers dead, another 21 million were wounded. And beyond the battlefield, about 7 million civilians died from starvation and disease. We're talking about entire generations of young men just wiped out.
And the peace treaty that came out of all this, the Treaty of Versailles, was really punishing, especially for Germany. It forced Germany to accept all the blame for the war with this war guilt clause. It made them pay crippling financial reparations, give up huge chunks of territory, and slash their military. And all these terms, they created this deep, lasting resentment inside Germany.
So in the end, 4 massive empires, the German, the Russian, the Austro-Hungarian, and the Ottoman, they all just crumbled into dust. And from those ashes, new countries were born. But the new borders, drawn up by the winners, often just ignored the people who actually lived there, sowing the seeds for conflicts that are still going on today. The war to end all wars, well, it turned out to be just a prelude to an even bloodier future.